I'm 82 years old, and it took me longer than I care to admit to understand that being respected at work meant very little when I came home to an empty house. At this age, the house is always quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that reminds you that no one is waiting for you in the next room. No one is going to call your name from the kitchen. No one is going to ask how your day was. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I've had a full life by most standards, a long career. Awards on the wall. A retirement dinner where people stood up and said kind things about my leadership and my discipline. I shook hands. I smiled. I drove home that night alone. I didn't understand then why that drive felt heavier than it should have. When I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, I believed something very simple. A man proves his love by providing. That's what my father did. He left before sunrise and came back after dark. We didn't see him much, but we never went without. I respected him for that, so I followed the same path. I married at 27. She was patient. That's the word that comes to me now. Patient with my long hours, patient with my need to answer one more call before dinner, patient when I missed her birthday because a client threatened to walk away. At the time, none of it felt cruel. It felt necessary. I worked in operations for a manufacturing company, nothing glamorous. But I was good at it. I could solve problems, I could calm angry clients, I could stay steady when other people panicked. My bosses noticed, promotions came, more responsibility came with them. Responsibility felt like importance. We had 2 children, a boy first, then a girl. I remember holding each of them in the hospital, promising silently that they would have everything I didn't. A bigger house, better schools, security. Security became my obsession. I told myself that the long hours were temporary, just until the next promotion, just until we paid off the mortgage, just until the kids were older. There was always a just until. I remember one Saturday morning. My son had a little league game. He must have been 8. I had promised him I would be there. He had asked me twice that week to make sure. That morning, the phone rang. A shipment had been delayed. The client was furious. I stood in the kitchen with the receiver pressed to my ear while my son waited by the door in his uniform, glove in hand. "I'll make it by the 3rd inning," I told him. I didn't. When I got home that afternoon, he was in his room. My wife said they won. She said he played well. She said it gently, not accusing. That almost made it worse. I told myself there would be more games. There were. I missed many of them. The thing about choices like that is they don't feel like choices. They feel like obligations. Like you're being pulled by something larger than yourself. I believed that if I didn't answer every call, if I didn't fix every crisis, the whole structure would collapse. People depended on me. And they did, at work, at home, they learned not to. My wife stopped asking if I'd be home for dinner. She would leave a plate in the oven sometimes. Other nights, she stopped doing even that. The kids grew into their own routines. Homework at the table without me. School plays where my seat was empty. I told myself they understood. In my 40s, I reached a position I had chased for years. Senior Operations Director, corner office, my name on the door. I remember standing in that office after everyone had left, looking out over the parking lot. I felt proud. I had done what I set out to do. That night, I got home past 9. The lights were off. Everyone was asleep. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the silence, and I remember thinking, this is what success sounds like. I laugh at that now, but not because it's funny. The slow cost of my decisions didn't show up as shouting or slammed doors. It showed up as distance, small at first, easy to ignore. My daughter stopped telling me about her friends. My son stopped asking for help with his homework. My wife developed her own world, book clubs, volunteer work, neighbors I barely knew. We weren't fighting. That's the strange part. There was no dramatic explosion, just less and less to say to each other. I convinced myself that stability was enough. That love didn't require constant presence. That once I retired, I would make it up to them. We would travel. We would sit at the table for hours. I would finally listen. I assumed there would be time. In my 50s, my wife mentioned quietly that she felt alone. We were sitting at dinner. I had come home early for once. She didn't raise her voice. She just said, "I miss you even when you're sitting right here." I didn't know what to do with that sentence. I told her things would slow down soon, that I was doing this for us, that she knew how much pressure I was under. She nodded. She always nodded. A few years later, my son moved across the country for work. I told him I was proud of him. I was, but there was a stiffness between us. Phone calls felt formal. We talked about his job, about practical things, not much else. My daughter married a good man. At the wedding, I gave a speech about family and commitment. People clapped. I looked at her standing there in her dress, and I realized I didn't know her favorite book. I didn't know what she feared. I didn't know the details of her life. I knew her resume, not her heart. The turning point didn't come with fireworks. It came in a hospital room. I was 67. My wife was 65. She had been feeling tired for months, but she brushed it off. We both did. There was always something more urgent, a quarterly report, a board meeting. By the time we took it seriously, it was late. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed, listening to the machines, realizing that all the problems I had solved in my life meant nothing in that room. There was no negotiation, no strategy, no way to outwork what was happening. She looked at me one evening and said, "I thought we'd have more time." That sentence has never left me. She passed away 3 months later. After the funeral, the house felt different, not just quiet, hollow. Her chair by the window, her books on the shelf, the kitchen table where she had eaten so many meals without me. I retired the following year. People said I had earned it. They said I would finally be able to enjoy life. Enjoy it with whom? That's where I'll pause for now. If you'd like me to continue, I will. After I retired, the phone stopped ringing. That was the first thing I noticed. For 40 years, my days had been dictated by that sound. Urgent voices, problems waiting for me to solve them. Then suddenly nothing. At first, I told myself it was a relief. I slept later. I made coffee and stood by the window where my wife used to sit. The mornings were slow, too slow. I thought I would fill the time easily. There were projects around the house, drawers to organize, old papers to sort through. I found performance reviews with my name at the top. Words like dependable, strategic, indispensable, indispensable. It's a dangerous word. It makes you believe that if you stop moving, everything will fall apart. But when I left, they replaced me in 2 weeks. The company continued. The shipments moved. The meetings went on without me. I don't resent them for that. That's how it should be. Businesses survive. That's their nature. What doesn't survive so easily are neglected conversations. I tried calling my son more often. The first few times, he seemed surprised to hear from me in the middle of the day. "Everything okay, Dad?" he would ask. Everything was fine. I just didn't know what to say. We talked about the weather, about his job. There were pauses that felt unfamiliar. When he had to go, he would say, "Good talking to you," in a polite tone. I would hang up and sit there with the receiver in my hand, wondering why it felt like I had just spoken to a colleague instead of my own child. My daughter visited when she could. She brought the grandchildren. The house felt alive on those afternoons, toys on the floor, laughter in the hallway. I tried to step into those moments. I really did. I would sit on the carpet and ask the children about school. They were kind to me, but I could sense that I was a guest in their world, a visitor, not a constant presence. That's not their fault. It's hard to build closeness in your 70s with people you barely made time for in your 40s. There's one afternoon I think about often. My grandson had a school recital. He was playing the piano. My daughter invited me weeks in advance. I marked it on the calendar. This time there was no client, no emergency, nothing to pull me away. I sat in the auditorium and watched him walk onto the stage. His hands were shaking a little. I recognized that look. I had seen it on my son's face decades ago, standing in his baseball uniform. When my grandson finished, he scanned the crowd. For a second, our eyes met. He smiled, and I felt something close to joy, but it was mixed with something else, a kind of ache. Because I realized how many of those looks I had missed before. You don't get those back. Life doesn't send you a recording of the moments you skipped. As the years passed, the house grew quieter still. Friends from work drifted away, not out of cruelty. We just didn't have the shared urgency anymore. Without the office, we didn't have much to connect over. I began to understand that most of my relationships had been built on function. We needed each other to complete tasks. Once the tasks disappeared, so did the need. At home, there had been chances to build something deeper. I can see that now. Simple evenings at the table, long walks, listening without glancing at the clock. I thought those things could wait. In my late 70s, I had a minor health scare, nothing dramatic, a brief hospital stay. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles, I had too much time to think. I imagined what would happen if I didn't walk out of that building. Who would sit in the front row at my funeral? What stories they would tell? Would they talk about how I stayed late to finish reports? About how efficiently I ran a department? Or would they struggle to find something personal to say? That thought unsettled me more than the illness itself. I recovered physically, but something shifted in me. I began to see my life not as a series of achievements, but as a pattern of absences. Empty seats at school plays. Conversations postponed until they were no longer needed. Apologies I never quite formed because admitting fault would have meant admitting I had misjudged my priorities. My wife's last words about time echo in my head most evenings. "I thought we'd have more time." So did I. I thought retirement would be the beginning of our real life together. Long breakfasts, travel, the kind of slow days we had postponed for decades. Instead, I sit alone at the kitchen table. The wood is worn where her hands used to rest. I sometimes catch myself starting to tell her something before remembering there's no one there to hear it. This is what can't be fixed. I can't go back to that Saturday morning and let the phone ring. I can't sit in the bleachers and clap for my son. I can't give my daughter the version of her father who asked more questions and gave fewer instructions. Time doesn't negotiate. If you're listening to me now, I'm not here to tell you to quit your job or ignore your responsibilities. I understand what it means to carry weight, to feel that others depend on your steadiness. But I would ask you to look carefully at what you believe is indispensable. The company will survive you. The emails will stop. Your name will be taken off the door. The people at your table are not as replaceable. I used to think love was proven through sacrifice, long hours, tired eyes, providing more than enough. There's some truth in that. Security matters, but presence matters in a different way. It's quieter. It doesn't show up on performance reviews. No one applauds you for sitting through a school recital or turning off your phone at dinner. And yet those are the moments that remain. At 82, my world is smaller. I move slower. I tire easily. I don't know how many more years I have. I don't say that with drama. It's just a fact. I spend my mornings with coffee and memories. Some of them are warm. Many are edged with regret. I don't hate the man I was. He believed he was doing the right thing. He was afraid of failing the people he loved. What he didn't understand was that you can fail them quietly, even while succeeding everywhere else. If this story feels familiar to you, I hope you sit with that feeling for a while, not to judge yourself, just to notice. Notice who is waiting for you tonight. Notice who still asks if you'll be there. Those invitations don't last forever. As for me, I try to show up now in the ways I still can. I call my children, even if the conversations are brief. I attend the recitals. I say I love you more plainly than I used to. It doesn't erase the past, but it's what I have left to give. When I walk through this house at night, I no longer pretend the silence is success. I understand what it is. It's the sound of time that has already passed. And at 82, I have finally learned that respect from strangers is a thin comfort when you're sitting alone at your own kitchen table.